Wow, it's full in here. I was worried. I'm here with my daughter today. Coming up the stairs to check in for my badge, one of the volunteers was like, hey, Kelsey, after the talk, can I get some time with you to talk about career stuff? And I would say for the last 2 years, that has been super common. Lots is changing in the industry. I started in 1999. If you could spell computer, you got a job. It's very different now. And I can see the concern in the eyes when they ask those questions. They're not looking for simple answers. They want something a little bit more nuanced. And so when I think about the type of answers I want to give, sometimes I do try to simplify it. And so if that's your question, I think there's only 2 things you ever have to worry about when it comes to this work. Does it work or not? If it works, then you ain't got nothing to worry about. If it doesn't work, then you only have 2 things to worry about. Can you fix it or not? If you can fix it, then you ain't got nothing to worry about. If you can't fix it, then you only got 2 things to worry about. Can someone else fix it or not? If someone else can fix it, then you ain't got nothing to worry about. If not, then there's really only 2 things you have to worry about. Can you find another job or not? And I think it's so important to make sure that your tool belt over time continues to grow so you can always figure out what to do in any of those scenarios. I think it's really, really important. And so my daughter represents that next generation of people looking to get into this field, looking to do this work. And there's a lot of hype around LLMs. You probably pay for all of them. You don't want to miss out. There's a lot of FOMO going on. But one thing that I think we don't talk about enough is like the people who've been doing this for a while, we have one major advantage that I don't think we talk about is that we had the privilege of training our own models for the last 2 to 3 decades. So what does that look like? So I'm going to walk through a little bit of my journey. I'm going to share my screen. Back in the day, we used to type in commands to make the computer do stuff. And before we were platform engineering, we were system administrators. You guys remember that title? Some of y'all still have that title? No, LinkedIn is all updated. Good job. And one of the things that was dope about being a system administrator, they would get your name, social security number, bank account, and then they will give you keys to the castle. It could be your first job, and you have the Oracle password, Active Directory, have no idea what you're doing. It's a rite of passage to delete all the data at least once or twice. But they still let you do it again. And I remember my first job, not my first job, but my first corporate job, you know, the one where they make you wear a shirt and tie every day except for Friday. You can wear jeans on Friday. And it's Friday. I'm feeling good about myself. And then they had this place where all the knowledge is kept. It's called SharePoint. You ever use SharePoint? And you go in there, and there's all this documentation written 10 years before you got there. And apparently, it's still good. And there's this concept of a change window. And so I'm sitting at my desk like, Kelsey, you've been here 3 days. You're ready for prime time. I was like, I don't think so. And I logged into SharePoint, and it's like, hey, to do a deployment, all you got to do is log into the jump box and run the deploy.sh command. And so without thinking, you do not deviate from SharePoint, okay? So you sit down at your cubicle. The nice thing about cubicle, there's an element of privacy. And so I sat down and I just ran it. It's like you look at it and you're asking yourself, no typos. You tab complete and everything. And you just hit enter. And you're like, oh, it's doing something, obviously. And time is going by, and if you're a system administrator, especially if you were writing corn shell script, there is no activity bar. There's none of that. It's just hit enter and hope. So you're sitting in your cubicle, and you're just like, no feedback. I hope it's going well. How's it going, Kels? Totally fine. And a little bit of time passes, and the command exits. So you're asking yourself like, hey, none of the Nagios monitors are going off. Nothing's red. But you learn from your early Unix commands that you have to check if this works. So you echo, and you see the number 1. If I'm understanding correctly, that's not good. It's supposed to be 0. And so we used to pick over the cubicle and say, hey, come over here. Shh, don't talk loud. Just come here. Pull up a chair. It's like, this don't look right. It should be 0. They're like, what command did you run? It's like, deploy.sh. It's like, it's the wrong command. It's like, but why is it in SharePoint? It's like, no, that's the wrong command. And I'm like, oh. Okay. So I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, all right, I do work at this financial institution, so deploy PCI compliance seems like the right thing to do. But there's this obvious one sitting there. Deploy this one works. .sh. Who am I to ignore something like this? So I was like, all right, I think I got it from here. No problem. And look, to be careful, you always tab complete. This one works. You hit enter. You're like, all right, whew, dodged the bullet. Maybe I should update SharePoint, but I don't want to be the one that puts the wrong one there. So you run it. And you sit, and hopefully it gets better. You're like, oh, at least the deployment has failed. Your confidence is up. At least that matches expectations. Now, here's the thing. You're in your cubicle. And this thing didn't ask me to authenticate. Will they really know it was me? You just got to let this slide. And the one thing that I worried about at that time was like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I'm just running random ass commands. I'm following the build guide. And I think that was the thing that about system administration at that time, early or late 90s, was we just ran the command. Someone else built the command. I came from technical support into system administration. And it's just like, follow the commands. And if they don't work, call someone to help you. And I got stuck in that loop for a while. And I remember when I learned Bash. Bash was like my first, I'm going to call it real programming language. I don't care what y'all think. And so I remember writing my first set of Bash scripts. And I used to go to this place called CompUSA. You may not remember it. But they used to have these CDs in the back of the Linux magazines. If you don't know what a CD is, it's a circular disk you put into your computer. And it used to have like a different Linux distribution. I used to go to this site called DistroWatch. I don't think it's been updated since I first went to it. That's how it used to look. We didn't even have to go to the Wayback Machine. And we would just look at all these Linux distributions, and I would just download them all, right? So much that I would fill up my hard drive with these little ISO files, right? Half of these distros were not even worth using, and some stuck. And I said, I'm going to learn Bash. And the way you learn Bash is you start with one command at a time. Would you all agree? One command at a time. And so I remember learning how to find stuff on my computer, right? I want to find all the ISO files in a download folder. Very straightforward, right? And you run this command. It's pretty straightforward. Nothing too exciting here. It's like, yes, a bunch of ISO files. And I would like to do is just delete these periodically, right? And so you look at this, and I think to myself, like, these command lines are just not intuitive at all. This was never a good design. It totally worked, but it wasn't perfect. It turns out a lot of these short names and short flags were a byproduct of the programming language that these things were written in, right? If you're dealing with a computer with 8K of memory, not 8 gigs, 8 kilobytes of RAM, written in C, buffer overflows, et cetera, you're going to do these shorthand things mainly because of the limitations of the systems, never designed for humans themselves. And I remember, like, okay, what do these flags mean? And if you're like me, you learn the man page. Anybody? There's this secret. If you want to be better than 80% of the people who do this work, read the documentation. Seriously, the number of people like, did you read the docs? I was like, what docs? We even have a term for it. I won't tell you what it is. And so you can run the man pages. And a lot of people don't like man pages. If you think about it, it's like mansplaining things you already know. So if you struggle with mansplaining, there's a trick you can do. It's really dope. You can alias man to mom. So you should totally listen to your mom. Makes you feel better, so you can just do mom, find, and then follow the directions, okay? And so we would go through all of these flags, and to be honest, most of this documentation isn't helpful either. There's really no good examples in some of this stuff. It's just archaic. Like, you just need to know what all of these symbols mean. And I know a lot of people complain about people not learning this stuff and just using ChatGPT, but we can't pretend like we didn't go to Stack Overflow to figure things out, right? We just had a less automated way of doing it. And so I remember getting good at reading these man pages, and I would craft these commands. So I can find all the distributions, and you're like, ooh, you learned this pipe thing. I can take data from one thing, unstructured data, usually terminated by a new line, and I can send it to something like xargs. Didn't even know what these things mean, but I saw it on the internet. And you just pipe it to this like RM command, right? Like, this is gonna be totally fine, right? So you run it, and it's like, oh! Didn't work, right? And so you step through this, and this is how we built our mental models of the world. If you did this really wrong, you probably deleted the whole operating system from root, and for a minute, it looks like your computer works, but nothing else will input. It's pretty much over. You need to format your drive. Hopefully, you have backups. If not, good luck. But it's a good lesson to learn. You didn't do it again. Turns out what you need to do is, anyone knows what the next command is? Who said that? Yeah, OG. Look at the gray beards in the audience. I'm very proud of you right now. To my young folks, you should figure out what this means and say -0, is that correct? Okay. Then it deletes it. And we start to compound this knowledge over time. And when we saw people doing things like this manually, you will get frustrated and you would say things that were very threatening to their career and their existence. I will replace you with the shell script. Anyone ever do that? Ever replace someone's job with the shell script? Oh, she's like, yeah, I did it a few times. That's mean. And this is when I fell in love with this profession. It's one thing to run commands that other people write. It's one thing to learn how these commands work, but it's another to create your own. And the one thing about humans, we're super creative. And I think it's important to be creative when we're doing this kind of work so you can make new commands. And I think a lot of our profession is built around this idea of solving problems and building new commands. It's just kind of what makes, I think, this profession unique. And so I built this command called zap. I just want to zap all of those ISOs off my disk. Let me build it first. So these days, I'm writing in Golang, and I'm just going to run the command. And man, this is when I fell in love with computers. Y'all don't have music for your command line tools? And I literally think in the moment when I wrote my first shell script to realize that I can make the computer do exactly what I wanted, I kind of felt like I was in control. And at that moment, I think I kind of moved on from being a system administrator. But here's the hard thing about this. We don't work in isolation. There's another part of this field that makes it, I think, the most challenging. The computers I can deal with. People, a bit more complicated. In our profession, people get stuck in their ways in some situations. There's some giggling. It's probably you or a colleague. And I remember at that particular company, I started changing things. I was doing the forbidden. I was automating some of the things so you wouldn't have to go to SharePoint anymore. And I remember joining around the holidays, so I don't have vacation time. The whole team is gone. And I'm sitting there, and we had this thing where people magically make wishes to system administrators called Jira. And they just create these tickets, and somehow they get assigned to you. And I remember we were working on replacing our payments platform, and people would just open a Jira ticket to do deployments, the same thing over and over again. Every hour, another deployment. another deployment. And people would just copy and paste from the ticket, run the commands, and cross their fingers and hope the right thing happened. And if it did, you would copy some input into the ticket and close it and wait for the next ticket. Literally became the job. And I can see how a lot of people, if that was their experience, why they would not want to be involved in this work. And so sitting there, no one was there, I started using this tool called Puppet. You guys remember Puppet? Some of y'all still have Puppet. Some of y'all is trying to get rid of Puppet. That's typically the loop. So I remember writing this tool that would watch the Jira tickets, look at the custom fields, extract the variables, and then just automate the whole deployment process. And if you got really fancy, you would use the Jira API to send the output from the commands. So as soon as they open the ticket, Puppet would run, update the ticket. It's like, dude, how are you doing this so fast? I was like, yeah, I just got this magic formula. Keep assigning those tickets. And it seemed like every minute people were opening these tickets because they knew that they would get done and closed. The team comes back. Hey, Kelsey, this is not the process. What is this Puppet thing? It's not approved by the security team. Can I see the policy? It's in our head. But you can't do that. And I remember it was the first time I got in trouble at work, doing something without getting consensus of the entire team. And to be fair, I was a bit immature. I probably should have checked with a few people, but I thought I had a solution that worked. I thought this was the job, actually. Solve problems and make them go away forever. Turns out that's not really the case. As a professional, your job is to get consensus on the solution so that more than you can actually do it. Probably the biggest lesson that I learned at that time is that this is actually a team sport, and when you go solo, sometimes there's going to be a consequence. The thing that made that the most frustrating, after about a year of getting that consensus and doing this, I even learned Java to have the app start logging structured logs so it can be picked up by some of the newer systems we had. I remember my director went to a conference. This is right around the time a guy named Patrick Dubois came up with the term, we all say it together, DevOps. And I remember they came back so energized from the conference. I didn't get to go, by the way. A little salty about that one. And then they came back and said, Kelsey, we finally understand what you're doing. I was like, what am I doing? You're doing DevOps. I was like, how do the people, so reluctant to change, didn't want to be a part of this particular thing, offer very little help, get to describe the work that I do? Because for me, the DevOps word was unnecessary. In my opinion, it was just learn as enough skills as you can to be helpful in as many contexts as you can. And so the word DevOps didn't really make sense to me because the work comes before the title. And I watched the team slowly update their LinkedIn profiles to DevOps engineers. I'm like, how and when? And it became this thing that was, to me, was very associated with the superficial target that was a little decoupled from the actual outcomes. And so I remember that year I started contributing to Puppet. And I think one thing that I think for me, when new people ask me about their careers, I think your reputation is your best resume. Even if you did perfect work inside of 4 walls, you automate all the deployments, and no one knows who you are. And it's your job to try to compete in the application process with 1 million other people. Have you seen these things these days? I meet people and they tell me, oh, I applied to 10,000 jobs. How does one apply to 10,000 jobs? And then why is that not working? Well, it turns out these days, people don't even read the resumes. I had a friend that told me he did his first phone screen to a bot, literally to a bot. So your resume is being scanned for keywords. If it pattern matches correctly, you might get a call, not by a human, but by a bot. And they ask you these very superficial questions. And then we start gaming the system. We just all start to revert not to the right answer, but the answer that they want to see. And so my fear is that if we all do that, the creativity starts to go away. We just dilute ourselves, and then we become this mediocre group of people that are just trying to hone ourselves to the algorithm. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but I start to see that pattern arise. And then we had an explosion of tools. Y'all ever seen this before? If you want to get your LinkedIn profile dope, close your eyes and just start throwing darts at this. Whatever the darts land on, install it in your Kubernetes cluster. And that's good for about a 15% salary increase at minimum. And so I just watched the industry start collecting random ass tools. Why do you have that in your cluster? And most people can't explain why. It's like I saw Kelsey at KubeCon talk about how great Service Mesh was, so I did it. I apologized. You should be only using the things you actually need. And I think if you really think about what platform engineering is, I think it's also about solving problems based on the actual use case. I'm going to say one last thing about this learning mode. Sometimes I think in the industry, we do overcomplicate this whole thing. I remember reading the famous Borg paper. And I was at Puppet Labs. This paper came out. And this is right before this thing called Docker came out, where containers made this big explosion. I'm at Docker, one of the first companies to disrupt the old concept of a system administrator and gave us this amazing automation framework. And when containers came out, I remember we were afraid to even talk about it because we didn't want to be disrupted ourselves. So we went from disruption to being afraid of the same thing happening. And it happened. And I remember reading this paper, and look, I just couldn't understand all of this stuff. Some of it made sense. You know, you scroll through this, there's these things about scheduling and bin packing, and sometimes they even put mathematical formulas in these things. And I think the other part of being a platform engineer is being able to explain the work that we do. So I'm going to try to explain that just a little bit to show you what my formula has been. And I think we're going to have time for a fireside chat right afterwards. So I know people will have questions, and we're going to go deeper on some of this stuff. But I think one thing that really helped me hone my career and led to an early retirement, I retired at 42. Someone's like, hey, why'd you retire at 42? If you know the joke, because that's the answer to everything. And so I got really good at explaining things. So I read papers like this, contribute to projects like Docker and Kubernetes. And I remember I was at a conference once, and everyone was about to give their keynotes. It's like, you know what, this time, I'm not going to use slides. I'm going to try to convince a room of system administrators that this should change the way they work. But I'm going to try to do it without any slides. I'm going to try to not mention things like Kubernetes. And so I got on stage, and I thought about it for a while. Anyone ever played this game? OK, so Tetris is one of my favorite games of all time. And this is right towards the peak of DevOps. Automate all the things. They even had T-shirts that said so. And I remember, I was like, look, when you automate all the things, here's what it looks like. You come in, and you craft the perfect shell script like I did earlier. And there was this fantasy around one-click deployments. Any of you all ever achieved this? Here's what one-click deployments look like in reality. You click one time, and you walk off like a cowboy into the sunset. And this is literally what's happening behind the scenes. To the left and right, there's just all the memory and disk space going unused, wasted resources, no logic. And you typically run out of compute, and then there's this thing we invented called on-call, where you rushed, try to deal with this thing. And then I think our systems have gotten way more complicated. We can't just be wasteful as we were now because people want to do a lot more on the same type of infrastructure. And so in those scenarios, we have to think about this problem differently. And this is also the evolution of the Linux system administrator to the DevOps engineer to the platform engineer. I think the platform engineer is way more in tune to the underlying infrastructure than ever before. We went from using tools to building tools to actually dictating what the platform can do. And in that mode, we play the game a little differently. And this is where things like schedulers come into play. We look at every workload, we examine where they belong, we line them up in a way that makes sense. It could be a batch job, it could be a web job, it could be something that back-ends a mobile application. And we place them nicely, using memory effectively. And in some ways, you can almost wait for the perfect piece to show up. And I'm just talking through live, playing Tetris, hopefully it works. And now our infrastructures are way more robust. And for you all that have really figured this stuff out, you kind of get to the point where when that magical workload does show up, you clear all the memory, and the system runs efficiently. This is the holy grail. When we can make our infrastructure run like that, and then maybe the promise is that it'll be all automatic, but if you've evolved as an engineer, you're going to have to. The platforms are more complicated, and so will you be. And don't forget one thing. Make sure you train your own model. Thank you.